The damage control surrounding Avowed has been pushed into hyperdrive following its release, and journalists are already gaslighting readers into believing false narratives mere days after the game's official release. So Avowed is out officially. It's on Xbox and PC only right now, and the Game Pass numbers, they don't really matter in this discussion, because you can get Game Pass for as little as $1 from certain deals online or in stores. But is Avowed doing well for Xbox? Probably. But it's because the barrier to entry is so low for new releases on that platform, even though it's been documented for a long time now, that Game Pass absolutely does devalue and ruins the potential of games with its approach. Of course, this isn't stopping legacy media websites to try to spin the story the same way they tried with Dragon Age Veilguard, only to admit a month after that game's release that, yeah, it didn't resonate and was actually an abysmal failure in the end. This is from Game Rant. Avowed is already a big hit on Steam. This is sus, but it gets even more stupid when you read how Game Rant words this in a very selective way to push their narrative. They state in their summary here that Avowed is a top seller and is beating Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 right now, which is again very selective because all the context is thrown out the window with this claim. Firstly, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, while not an old game mind you, came out at the very beginning of February 2025. This video that you're watching will be out on February 20th, 2025. Meaning that Kingdom Come 2 as of right now is well over 2 weeks removed from its hype cycle and initial release window. So naturally, a new product taking over the top spot, so to speak, is not unlikely to happen. Because again, despite Game Rant's selective wording here, it's like saying that you are the fastest runner on the track. But in reality, this is only the case because the actual fastest runner is at home sleeping when you said that. So technically, sure, you are the fastest, but not really. Does that make sense? Of course, Game Rant also says that the game has positive reviews, which I mean is half true at best. It's sitting at an 80 on Metacritic, which mind you, it's not bad, but it's not exactly Game of the Year, contender, change your life levels of Metacritic score. But it also doesn't end there, because Game Rant continues their selective approach where they say this. Steam database recorded Avowed's 8,752 active players at the time of writing, which is an applaudable start to the game's longevity, and it reached an all-time peak of just over 17,000 players during its launch day. Are you guys being paid by Microsoft or Obsidian? Because you're out of your mind, Game Rant. In no company's mind is less than 10,000 players day one on the largest PC gaming platform for your new AAA RPG game that took almost 5 years to make somehow good news. This is frankly abysmal, and that's being generous. As we can see here, Avowed, as of this video being posted, has hit an all-time player peak of just 17,000 players on Steam, which is abysmal for a game made by a AAA studio. Even by AA studio standards, these numbers would be worrying out of the gate. So let's just keep it simple and say that every copy of Avowed that was paid full price is at $70 here. This means with its all-time player peak, Obsidian has made just $1.2 million in sales from their new game that took 5 years to make. Which again, for a AAA action RPG, that is genuinely abysmal. Granted, Avowed did beat the Outer Worlds numbers, another Obsidian RPG from its top concurrent player count on Steam by mere hundreds of players. However, in Outer Worlds' case, it did also have the PlayStation players to fall back on for the majority of its support. Although a bit of a skewed example, when the Outer Worlds came out in the UK, at least 78% of the overall sales for that game came solely from PlayStation, with the other 22% of the overall sales being on PC and Xbox platforms. Overall, 6 years later, The Outer Worlds has sold about 5 million copies, and I think it's safe to say that a lot of that was because of the PlayStation players. In this case right now, Avowed is not available on PlayStation yet, although I will bet money that it will be announced to have a port by the end of the year at the latest. So relying solely on PC players as your only real source of income because Game Pass is just Netflix slop, and the money that's generated there isn't necessarily due to Avowed because it's just one big service that's full of other games too, like Call of Duty Black Ops 6 for example. So this $1.2 million for your brand new game at release, that is very, very bad. If Obsidian didn't have Microsoft's Game Pass to fall back on here and they had to survive solely on the PC numbers that we have in front of us, this would be genuinely grounds for the entire studio to be terminated overnight if I'm being straight up with you guys. It isn't good knowing that New Vegas, for example, another Obsidian game, hit a peak of the mid-40,000s well over 10 years ago when PC gaming was but a fraction of the size that it is right now. So for a more recent comparison, Veilguard hit almost 100,000 in its opening few days and was still considered a resounding flop when the dust settled. So for Avowed to be reaching around 25% of the player base that Veilguard has at launch, I mean, come on guys. And again, comparing it to something like Kingdom Come 2, it's not really that fair. That game recently sold over 2 million copies, and had a concurrent player count on Steam around 250,000 players within the same period. Meaning if we were to divide Kingdom Come's player base against Avowed's, this means within a similar time frame, that Avowed has amassed an audience size equivalent of 14.7% of Kingdom Come 2's at release. And yet Avowed is made by a AAA RPG studio backed by a trillion-dollar company, while Kingdom Come is a much smaller operation that was made by, I guess, a AA company, kind of, almost AAA somewhat. Warhorse is kind of nebulous. It's somewhere between the two sizes, so it's unfair to call them full-blown AAA because they aren't. And we know that Warhorse's newest game costed them around $41 million or so to make. So again, avoiding all the tax differences and just using American dollars as an easy method here, this means that Kingdom Come 2 has roughly made about $140 million so far in sales since its release. And Avowed, like I said, has made about $1.2 million, barely even a few percent the profit of Kingdom Come 2 in comparison. But again, I don't think the performance of Avowed at launch really matters to Obsidian either way because they are just owned by Microsoft. And like I said before in another video about Avowed, keeping the game's division alive and moving is peanuts for Microsoft in the grand scheme of things. I more so just have a problem that because of Game Pass, it has emboldened the developers under Microsoft's thumb to pretty much not try as hard to make quality products because there's really no incentive to. If your boss at work told you whether you do good at your job or you just slack off that your pay and your future wouldn't really change, I think most people would then just not try nearly as hard, since if there's no incentive to perform better, then why bother in the first place, right? This is why in jobs with concepts like commission or tips and whatnot, people usually do try much harder to perform their jobs better, because there's actual, incentive that extra effort could actually translate to more revenue for them. I used to work as a server in a restaurant. If I didn't make tips at that job, why would I even try? Let's be real. I would just be moving at a snail's pace doing the bare minimum if I knew it changed nothing in the end, and that's what Game Pass is pretty much. And it's clear that Xbox doesn't really care about quality or competition anymore because this comes from Xbox era. Phil Spencer says Xbox is done trying to convince PS5 and Switch players to move over. I'm not trying to move them all over. This article pretty much solidifies that the concept of the whole console war, it's 100% dead and gone officially now. There is no point in trying to fight if PlayStation or Xbox are better, because now, the only platforms that really matter are PlayStation, PC, and Nintendo. And Nintendo, as we know, they clearly just don't compete with anybody, and they just kind of stay in their own lane, and that's working for them clearly. But here's what Phil Spencer had to say about all of this. There are people, whether it's their libraries on a PlayStation or Nintendo, whether it's they like the controller better, they just like the games that are there. And I don't want to then look at that and say, well, there's no way that we should be able to build a business there, find fans of our franchises there. I'm not trying to move them all over to Xbox anymore. People were also invested in where our games are. Let's just allow more people to play. So there you go. The head of Xbox just firmly stated that Microsoft is just done trying to convince you to buy an Xbox over anything else. And at this point, the concept of an Xbox is pretty much pointless going forward. Just use a PlayStation or a PC, I guess, if you want to play the majority of your Xbox games now. Because it's only a matter of time before Gears and Halo that they come to PlayStation, and when it does, and it will, at that point, this whole console war schlock, it will be dead forever. And thank God for that, because we got to agree, man, it's annoying. But the ultimatum that Xbox as a brand stands at is genuinely the fault of Microsoft and only Microsoft. They release subpar release after release for years, with their competition completely blowing them out of the water and winning Game of the Year awards, while Xbox just kinda sat there forgotten. And I mean that Game Pass killed any legit brand loyalty and caused an entire dwindling population of Xbox players to adopt a passive approach to how they consume game content. And now it doesn't matter anymore, and Avowed's quality speaks on how Xbox leadership views their games going forward. The game doesn't run well for many reviewers, the writing is said to be piss poor and boring at the best of times, and the companions are forgettable and the world overall just feels kind of uninspired. Its one big saving grace is that Avowed has fun combat. But this then just proves that Microsoft no longer really cares about fostering studios to deliver Game of the Year quality experiences anymore, because there's no incentive either in Microsoft's favor nor the developers to push themselves if copies sold amount to nothing in terms of revenue made. As long as the games being made are considered good enough for Game Pass, I guess, which is gaming talk for let's just flood our service, with a bunch of 6 or 7s out of 10 games, maybe an 8 here or there, then it is just working as intended. And if you want the real Game of the Year games with the best optimization, you don't play on an Xbox. I mean, how embarrassing that Skyrim currently has more players in-game than Avowed, and Skyrim is 14 years old at this point. Again, maybe this could change depending on when you see this video, but when a 14-year-old game that has been remastered more times than Horizon Zero Dawn is outperforming your brand new action RPG, well, kinda tells you what you need to know. Being good enough for Game Pass, that's one thing, but it's clear that Obsidian and Microsoft are also perfectly content with just releasing SLOP for full price, because either way, it doesn't really matter if you buy it or not. This is why I keep saying that once Avowed does come to PlayStation, I would just suggest that you just wait for a deep sale before playing it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't play Avowed, but it is a game that is clearly one of those 7 out of 10 games that you buy for like $20 years from now, and then you just kind of enjoy it because it, didn't cost you much in the first place, I guess. Avowed's like junk food, you know what I mean? And then there's nothing technically wrong with enjoying junk food once in a while, but I don't know about you, but I personally can't justify $80 Canadian for some junk food game myself. But value is in the eye of the beholder, and some people will just buy anything, I guess. And maybe Game Pass isn't the true issue here, but simply that Avowed is mid. I mean, Starfield managed to break 300,000 players in its opening few days of release on Steam too. Again, paid copies sold, not streamed. And some may try to say that Avowed was released on a weekday and that's why it's not performing, but no, Avowed's release date was on a Tuesday. Starfield released on a Wednesday, both middle of the week so to speak, so that doesn't really work here. And the fact that Avowed only really added about 4,000 concurrent players at release versus the early access numbers, that just kind of shows you that there really wasn't an appetite for this game specifically due to its quality or its messaging. And maybe if Microsoft incentivized the game studios that they have to make better quality products, there would be some actual real hype for them. But unfortunately, it's the exact opposite, and it is sad to see. I mean, you only need to look at a comparison between Avowed and Skyrim to see the stark difference in how these games operate and feel. So there was this video from the YouTube channel named Game Light. They do plenty of comparisons of other video games if you want to see more of that kind of stuff. But here's some of the comparisons between Avowed versus Skyrim, so please watch. And as you just saw, Avowed erases the arrows, people don't really react to being lit on fire for God's sakes. And NPCs in general, they don't really have routines, they just kind of stand there. While Skyrim has all of this, and again, it's a 14-year-old game at this point. And for example, while I have problems with Kingdom Come 2 from what I've played in my almost 60 hours of playtime with that game so far, I will admit it is nice to see how every NPC pretty much has a detailed daily routine that they follow. For an example, I don't have footage of this unfortunately, but there was one quest that I had to get from this guy who works in a mine, and he wouldn't speak to me about what he needed while he was on the clock and working. But once I waited till around 8 or 9 p.m. when he was off work, and then he was willing to speak to me because he wasn't on the clock anymore. So that was a nice detail, but Avowed clearly has none of these things. The world is just good enough, I guess, for Game Pass, and that's kind of sad to see. Although I think another big reason why Avowed just wasn't as widely accepted despite the lack of quality and all of that was, let's be real, their art director is an insane person. And people just simply do not want to support someone like Matt Hansen, who is the art director, who is arguably one of the worst pro-woke game developers in the industry right now, because back in March 2024, Elon Musk said that it's not acceptable for the games industry to hate white men exclusively and make content that, spites them. Matt Hansen, the art director of Avowed, would say that this would only embolden him further to be even more awful towards white people specifically. Not a good look, I know, but again, this was before these types had lost the election and thought that they were still the de facto power in the cultural zeitgeist. Then, when Trump won, Matt Hansen again said this in response. They need to feel the sting of shame for the rest of their putrid lives, to be honest, and that is me being nice. So this man just hates conservatives, I guess, and you see what I mean? This is likely a big reason why Avowed is being beaten by Skyrim during its release weekend numbers. Because people frankly just don't want to support games or any content really that's made by people who clearly hate them for their views or beliefs. Matt Hansen, unironically, is one of the most spiteful and hateful developers I've seen in a while, and that's saying something considering what I cover on this channel. Look, I'm not saying we need to be kumbaya and hug it out, because it's clear that Matt Hansen in his soul hates anyone who doesn't agree with him 100% of the time. He's not a really reasonable man, at least that's what it seems like, and it's sad to see, and I would have checked out Avowed once it came to PlayStation. But it's just gotten to a point where I don't really want to support this guy's continued employment at Obsidian, if I'm being honest. And these are one of those rare times where I genuinely think if Obsidian wants to do good by their studio and win back customer loyalty, their best option, to be honest with you, is to remove Matt Hansen from their studio. Sure, his art and work would still be in Avowed regardless, but it would at least cause players to maybe want to check out the game, knowing that at the very least, if they were to buy the game, that none of that money would be going to Matt Hansen to further employ him and his clearly out-of-date hateful views. I just think that we've reached a point with all of this, Gamergate and the rest, where players are they're not willing to support things that are made by people who genuinely just hate them. And I think we know that Obsidian has clearly put a muzzle on Matt Hansen because ever since his public outcry against conservatives and all the things that made him go viral, if you go look right now, that man has been radio silent across all of social media. But at this point, the very notion that this guy still works there and will continue to poison the well, so to speak, will just continue to make people not really want to get involved or support any upcoming Obsidian games. Of course, you've likely played many games made by people who have someone or a few devs on there that probably despise you or your worldviews. I almost guarantee it. I know for sure there's games these leftist types love playing that have devs on there that think that these people are genuinely insane. I know because I've talked to them. But now with social media being how it is, the connection between developer and player has never been easier, and frankly, that has been more of a curse in a lot of ways than it being positive, if you ask me. It's sort of like celebrities. Flashback to the 90s or the 80s, and most people looked at celebrities like they were gods among us. But once social media blew up and then these celebrities were given platforms to voice their unfiltered opinions, suddenly the masses were able to quickly realize that, oh wow, a lot of these celebrities are actually morons and they have nothing smart or important to say. For a good example, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Avengers is a fun movie, but now every time I see Mark Ruffalo, who plays Hulk in it, I'm just reminded how stupid this guy and his opinions are in real life, and because of social media and the push for activism over anything else that they champion, it has just done nothing but ruin these media types' reputation and ultimately smeared their mystique, so to speak. Now I don't look at the Avengers, and I just more so see a bunch of out-of-touch millionaires who have zero morals. And this same realization, it stems back with game developers, or really anyone else. I think social media in general has been largely a massive mistake. And we were never meant to know this much about one another or be this connected so constantly. And when I think about it, maybe a lot of these games that failed, like Dustborn, Suicide Squad, or I guess Avowed now, maybe they would have done far better had their devs not had access to voice their opinions so openly like they can now. Avowed could have just come out and been a fun action RPG. Sure, it had pronouns, but that had the option to be turned off. which was likely added due to the whole Matt Hansen art director backlash, I can almost guarantee that. But while it still would have had some ugly character designs and questionable writing at best, at the very least, it would have just released as a game that was fun to play, I guess. But now you have this cloud that is hanging over the head of everybody with their art director, and it shows how the opinions and actions of one bad apple can indeed ruin the entire batch. Like, even as I continue to review Kingdom Come 2 between videos, I find myself not liking the game at times, simply because I know how the game director of that game thinks outside of the world he was tasked with creating here. Daniel Vavra, the director of Kingdom Come 2, being an ass to fans online and attacking people and starting fights because he's got thinner skin than he would like to admit, I have to admit, it has had an effect on my experience within Kingdom Come 2. Because while there's some things I like about the game, it is still a janky game with by-the-numbers open-world game design, and the cherry on top is that I know that Daniel Vavra probably hates me, even though he too used to be an advocate for Gamergate. But he conveniently threw the whole movement aside once he used it to get the first Kingdom Come game fully funded. And then once he had built himself a sustainable platform, suddenly he was against it. That's shady, man. That's weird. And now moving forward, whatever Warhorse makes next, that notion that Vavra is Two-Face will be juxtaposed against whatever his team makes next too. It's unrealistic to believe that every single person working on these AAA games, which usually spans into the hundreds of developers, are all going to be nice people who agree with you on every opinion and be nice to you. I know that's unrealistic. I know there's someone on a team with the game that I like who probably would love to hear that I was harmed or died or something. But if you ask me, if you're a part of something where art is being made, it is your moral duty to ensure that you don't screw up what took hundreds of people to make, just because you're butthurt about something like Elon Musk or the election, like Avowed's Matt Hansen did. Because all this guy ended up doing was derailing his subpar action RPG game because he wanted to own the chuds, but ended up just owning himself and tanking his entire studio's reputation in the process. And I don't think for a second that this blemish by Matt Hansen is a one and done, by the way, because again, whatever Obsidian makes next will have this guy's stain attached to it as long as he stays employed there. So it's really up to Obsidian to decide whether they want their games to be taken in a serious light again. Or they can protect this guy's opinions who so clearly hates the very audience that Obsidian as a company is tasked with catering to. I used to be defensive of Obsidian back in the day, but this was back when Chris Avellone, the co-founder, was still a part of the studio. I mean, back in 2023, Avellone confirmed that he did try to get other Fallout New Vegas-like games or Elder Scrolls spin-offs to get made in partnership with Bethesda. But Todd Howard kept saying no and he wouldn't allow it to happen. Some took this as Todd Howard saw the success of New Vegas and he didn't want Obsidian outdoing his studio with an Elder Scrolls spin-off game or whatever else. But Chris Avellone has clearly long since left Obsidian, and the writing since his departure has also taken a nosedive since then, and it's very obvious. While that version of Obsidian, the one where, Chris Avellone was there, could have probably made some amazing Elder Scrolls spin-off games or new Fallout games, these days with how Obsidian is with this Matt Hansen being protected and the state of Avowed, maybe this was for the best. Because this Obsidian versus the New Vegas era Obsidian is nothing but yet another Ship of Theseus situation. Just like Rocksteady, they can swap out all the pieces of the ship that makes Obsidian with new wood, but at that point, is the ship still Obsidian? And it all comes down to the same realization I came to with Rocksteady as well. The ship that harbors the studio is not important, it's the crew that makes the ship what it is. And when Chris Avellone and his team that were at Obsidian left, that's what made Obsidian the award-winning developers that they were known for. But now that same ship is under new captains with a crew that despises you and me, and it just shows despite having the cannons. Or the same wood frame and the flags and all of that the ship that Obsidian used to be, it's all meaningless because the people that are helming the ship, they clearly just aren't as good as those who came before. And when you compare New Vegas to Avowed, yeah, I mean the proof is in the product and it's sad to see. So I don't have much faith, if at all, that Obsidian is anymore who they used to be. And frankly, as long as Matt Hansen remains there, I don't really want to support them, if I'm being honest with you guys. But what do you think of Avowed and Obsidian in general? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, subscribe, thanks to my supporters, and I'll see you soon.